Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Counterpoint Podcast. My name is Maurice, and I'll be your host again for this week. And today's podcast, I think, is going to be pretty interesting. We've seen this concept of foldable phones over the decades now. I think it was in the late 2000s when a couple of companies like Nokia first introduced concepts of foldable smartphones. But flash forward until now. And foldable phones are in the mainstream market. While they're still pretty expensive, they're trying to build out a niche. And today I have my VP of Research, Neil Shaw, with us, and we're going to be discussing foldable phones in a little bit more detail. Hey, Neil, how's it going?
Yeah, so thanks for inviting to the podcast. And I've been experiencing a few foldable phones over the last few months. And so happy to share my thoughts on what I have experienced in terms of the form factor, how futuristic it is, or whether it is not, and whether it is built for everyone or not. So we can discuss in detail.
That's great, Neil. All right. This concept of foldable phones really involves some complex engineering. From how the display works, and even to that hinge mechanism that we've seen multiple patents by a couple of OEMs already for how that works. And we've seen this hinge mechanism evolve. We've seen the display evolve, but in reality, do you think foldable phones have a practical use case right now?
Yeah, I think for a smartphone to be really smart, it's not just about how much applications you have and how you are using the phone in terms of number of taps or number of multitasking applications you have, and you can do it smoothly. But it's more about also the overall experience on how the device is in your hand. What are the different use cases in terms of the form factor of the device? So if you remember in feature phone days, there were like candy shell bar shaped feature phones, but at the same time, there were also flip phone, right? So it was a foldable form factor. It was the first foldable phone, if you can see. So that has completely different user experience, and it was very popular with a lot of different regions, like in US, for example, or even in Korea and Japan. So Japan still has a few foldable phones in terms of foldable form factor. But talking about the new generation foldable smartphones, what they are bringing in terms of user experience is a completely different form of multitasking experience, as well as you can get the benefit of two devices into one. So we saw how tablets evolved between 2010 to 2016, and since then the market has been steady because the screen size has increased for the phones, and there is a limit to how much you can have a slate form factor in terms of screen size. And we already reached almost 6.7, 6.8 inch in terms of like Galaxy Note type devices, which is still a big screen to we can hold in our hand for full time. So with foldable form factors, what we can do is we can still have that bigger screen experience, but in a very foldable form factor. And at the same time, once you open into a tablet mode, you can do a lot of multitasking. You can do app continuity, what Google defines, and added a lot of different software level support within the operating system natively from Android 10 onwards, right? So it's a form factor which is very flexible in terms of when you want it to work in a big screen tablet mode, or when you want it to work in a very smaller screen mode for just basic task. And after that, if you look at what with the form factor, it's also important how the apps scale, what the experience of this overall operating system is. And as I said, Android 10, with Android 10, Google has done a fantastic job of adding a lot of these features to enable a real foldable experience and bring that foldable experience to the surface and make it more meaningful.
Those are some really good points that you bring up, Neil. And you've actually tested out the Samsung Galaxy Fold and currently have the Galaxy Z Fold 2. Can you talk a little bit more about your first impressions of this new device and how it compares to the old Galaxy Fold?
Yeah, so the Galaxy Fold Gen 1, which launched last year, so I had used it briefly for almost 3 months. And the biggest thing is, after using that phone, actually, it was very difficult for me to adjust back to the smaller screen phone, a slate form factor. So it builds up your muscle memory in terms of how you interact with the device, and you get used to specific a task and gestures, as well as different applications, how you consume those applications and content, right, on a bigger screen versus a foldable screen. So the Gen 1 device was pretty good, but it was a little bit bulky. And obviously, now it feels bulky because compared to Gen 2, which I've been using, the Z Fold 2, there is a lot of improvements, not only in terms of the overall device form factor shapes, but the screen itself. The front screen is a full frontal front screen, full 6.23 inch, compared to Galaxy Fold, which was a very smaller screen and a very narrow. So here you can almost use it as a slate form factor. But when you open the device, it goes into a 7.6 inch tablet form factor. And the beauty of it is that now Google supports natively a lot of different features which Samsung is using, and also different sensors which goes into the hinge. So there is a hinge mode, which Google says is a hinge mode, but Samsung is renaming it as flex mode, where you can keep the device at a 90-degree angle, and you can actually there are a lot of apps which scales across both the screens in with different functions. And that actually brings the real foldable use cases to the surface, as I was saying earlier. And other thing is they have reduced the bezels, and even the camera, which was big notch, is now back to the pinhole type design language which Samsung has on other phones. So overall, I feel the device is a big improvement. But the best thing what Samsung has done is they have, in the short span of time, within almost 8 to 9 months, they have taken a lot of user feedback to enhance the overall device experience. And also in terms of the hinge mechanism, which has more than 200 parts, they have added a sweeper technology which they added in the this foldable device which they launched, the Z Flip, in a few months ago. So that sweeper mechanism also alleviates all the concerns with dust going into the hinge and so forth. So it's quite innovative design, and they have actually listened to a lot of user feedback and improved by leaps and bounds compared to Gen 1.
Right, and that was really one of the biggest concerns with these first photo devices is that hinge mechanism, getting debris in there, and secondly, the durability of the screen. And now with Samsung's new display, which actually has glass instead of plastic in it as well, it's a little bit more durable compared to the first gen. Have you noticed that as well?
Oh yeah, it is. The overall touchscreen experience feels more natural, like a smartphone, than the previous generation. And also it feels more glassy, as you said, like rather than plasticky. So that also gives a different user experience compared to Gen 1.
So we know from our research, right, that 120 hertz is kind of going to be a new standard almost in many of these high-end flagship devices, and the Galaxy Z Fold 2 has that 120 hertz refresh rate. Have you any had noticeable differences in using it? Does it feel more fluid?
So most of the phones are having higher refresh rates now, above 90 hertz. And what Samsung has done well here, and which I think they have done also on Note 20, is it has a dynamic refresh rate. So depending on the application, it can dynamically scale down, scale up the refresh rate, which helps saving the battery. And obviously, the experience is much fluid, less jittery when you come from a phone which does not have a high refresh rate. It actually makes the experience even more smoother, especially when you're playing games or watching videos.
Yeah, and I think that's something really to watch in the industry, really, where this high refresh rate goes, and how many more, flagship devices will have this feature, especially because Samsung has a large part of this display market share with their AMOLED displays. And so Samsung Galaxy Fold or the Fold series isn't the only foldable phone on the market, right? So we have Huawei, the Mate X, Royole, FlexPi, arguably the first folding display smartphone on the market. But they all have different types of form factors, right? They have an outward folding display. Not to forget to mention the new Microsoft Surface Duo as well, with their inward facing display. What's your take on these different form factors? Do you think one will win out compared to the other?
Yeah, it's difficult to say at this point, but it all depends on the scale of the particular OEM driving this form factor. So if Apple is driving a particular form factor, it becomes the industry standard, right? So if Samsung has driven a particular form factor, then it becomes the industry standard. Like with Note series, right? They started with a big screen, and everyone followed. Even Apple followed it. So if you'll see players like TCL and Royal, they will try to come up with different form factors. But again, it induces a lot of fragmentism in terms of hardware. Though Google is trying to solve that by supporting as many form factor, as many resolutions, as many displays within a foldable device. And like TCL, if you saw the concept which they showed recently, like accordion threefold phone, right? So that brings in another challenge on how to scale a particular app across like a threefold, right? When you open a device in accordion format, or when you open a device like a window, right? So there could be some fragmentation at software, app, and experience level, but again, it remains to be seen. It will depend on what the overall OEM strategy is and who scales it faster and better.
Yeah, and I think that actually brings me to the next point. So we've covered some aspects of this already in terms of challenges and what the compromises are to make a foldable smartphone, and the big one I think that we just touched upon is this third party developer challenge, really, to get all these different screen resolutions available in the apps that we all use. What do you think are some of the other challenges that we haven't talked about?
I think obviously the at software level, as I said, Google is trying to add as much as it can to support maximum screen ratios or a different multi-window or app continuity, which was I think one of the best innovation from Google to uh, to continue the apps when device is folded and when it is not. But the other challenge is for, I think, supply chain, the components players, right? How to, especially the display manufacturers. So to your earlier question, whether they should support a particular display type, right? If it does not have that much scale, the yield rate would always be very low, and it's not profitable for them to just create a million display, right, of a very different type for a particular manufacturer, right? But if it is someone like Apple, who is requesting like 100 million phones of the same this form factor, then it's easier for the display manufacturer. And there are very few display manufacturers left, anyways, in the market who can produce advanced displays. So that is the biggest challenge now, which is creeping in from hardware side. So display is one. Other is usability. I would say, as you say, you have different form factors, and if a user is used to a particular form factor, then again moving to a second form factor, it's going to be a learning curve, right? Over the period, assuming that over the next 2 decades, we'll see at least two or three different type of form factors settling in. So that kind of challenge I see. And obviously third most is the cost. When it will go sub $1,000, right? That is the first question. We have seen Motorola, Samsung having launched the mainstream devices which are at scale, right? Huawei did, but again, it's on and off, the Mate X. But if you look at the major Samsung and Motorola, which are driving those form factors visibly into the market, so for them, the price has still not broken the $1,000 barrier.
Right, and even Motorola is using a Snapdragon 700 series compared to the other flagship devices. So trying to compromise on some things and still not being able to get the price down is a big challenge currently.
It is like everyone is trying different form factors to at least differentiate. That is what is happening right now. Uh, but as I said, there will be one or two form factors which will remain steady state depending on the yield rate and scale for the display manufacturers in future. But obviously, there will be custom many designs which will be tried and tested, especially with the vertical integrated players like LG or TCL, right? So they have their own display business, so they have that liberty to do that, but they don't have the scale like Samsung or Apple or Huawei. So it remains to be seen which form factor will be more successful, and whether this is just an experimentation for to gain some differentiation and bring back the halo effect for the portfolio.
Well, nicely summarized, Neil. And I want to thank you for joining us on this week's discussion topic. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Enjoyed the discussion. Good questions. Thank you very much.
Great. And for listeners, as always, you can find us on different podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher. Please rate us and review us. And we'll also have this up on our website, counterpointresearch.com. And until next time, have a good one.